Hi, I'm Emma.
And I'm Helena, and we both work at the MS Trust. Just a little disclaimer, we're recording this over Zoom because of coronavirus and social distancing, so apologies if it sounds iffy at any stage. Please do bear with us.
We'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Multiple Sclerosis, Breaking It Down, and this, which is part 2 of mobility problems and mobility aids.
We originally planned for this to be just one podcast, but after talking to Emily the Wibbly Dinosaur, who was featured in the first episode, and Jody Barber, an MS physio, who is in this episode, we realized that it just had to be 2 episodes because there's so much to cover. Like, what should you do if you notice you have walking problems? How does it impact you both physically and mentally? And what aids are out there to help? And when is a good time to start using one?
We gave a bit of a short intro into walking problems in MS on the last episode, so if you'd like to find out some more, we suggest that you listen to part 1 first and then come back to this one.
And as we covered in last episodes, many people with MS have some difficulties with walking at some point, and it can arise from a number of different causes. And although walking problems are common in MS, there may be another cause, so it's really important to get advice from a health professional.
Speaking of health professionals, our guest this week is Jody Barber, a physiotherapist who has spent many years working with people with MS. Helena spoke to her about what you can do if you notice you've got mobility issues. So let's go ahead and find out what she had to say.
Breaking it down.
Right. This part of the podcast, we are going to talk about mobility aids and also a bit more about mobility problems. And we're here with longtime friend of the MS Trust, Jody Barber, who is a physiotherapist. Hi, Jody. How are you?
Hi, I'm really well. Thank you so much for asking me here today.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a physiotherapist. I've been a physiotherapist for approximately 30 years, and probably about 26 years of that have been working with people with multiple sclerosis. So that's kind of majority of my caseload now. And have followed a lot of people on their journey. I've worked in the same healthcare area for 20 years, so a lot of clients with MS I've been with from that 20-year journey with them.
Oh, wow. So we're talking mobility problems. Shall we start by sort of talking about how do they often start presenting themselves in MS?
I think the earliest kind of mobility problems, and some people listening might resonate with them, is like temporary sensory changes. Might then mean that they're not as aware of where their foot is on the ground and might notice that they've slipped or had a stumble. And that can be very, very unnerving and can then make you very cautious about how you move. So I would say very early on. And moving on from that, if you've got persistent kind of sensory changes, and often that's in absence of any motor, any actual muscle weakness at that moment in time. But if you can't feel something, you won't use it as much. And then if you don't use something as much, it will get weaker. So I see that a lot very early on. And often it's around navigating, well, we can't bring the sensation back, how you navigate managing that sensation and managing your muscle strength together. But with MS, it's something that you've got to work with for life. And there's the difference. And that can be really, really kind of challenging, but I would say that's where the early mobility problems I see, and probably a lot of people see, might not associate it necessarily with that because it's transient initially. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess if you start noticing these things, they're really, you shouldn't ignore it. You should definitely talk to someone about it.
Yeah. There's lots of advice and help out there. And ask your physiotherapist. Yeah, I know they're hard to get hold of these days. Yeah.
So the first person to sort of talk to, if you notice it, would maybe be your MS nurse or a GP, even so. Then So what can you do if you have mobility issues due to MS? What's the sort of
there's a whole range of mobility issues we can have. So just to qualify, we're talking about mobility issues with regards to how you move from place to place. So getting up out of a chair you might find you're a little bit off balance the first time you do that might unnerve you. And sometimes people, it is more about preventing risk, the risk of falling over. And if you feel that you've had a few episodes where you feel, I'm not sure about going out for a walk with a friend or to a cafe or a theatre. It's around that if you notice that you're starting to curb what you're doing, because you're worried you won't get from A to B.
Yeah.
Then it's what can you do next? So sometimes it's a form of, are there any exercises that I can do to help me manage in that situation, or where do walking aids fall in all of this? And I find a lot of people are understandably see taking on a stick or a walking frame or any form of walking aid as a little bit of a nail in the coffin of defeat to I'm not beating this MS, whatever. And that could be really, really challenging. And I've worked with so many people in how we navigate when is the right time to start thinking about using walking aids. And sometimes I think the best advice I could give to someone, if you have a fold-up one in your handbag, then if you don't have a handbag, your rucksack, then you can say you have a moment of fatigue or you have a wobble when you're out somewhere, then you can get it out and you've got literally something there to support yourself. And that might be the first way to maybe particularly give you that bit of insurance as to how, so that you're not refusing that trip out to meet a friend for coffee or another social event, because that's the thing. I would literally write a diary of how many times you've said no because you're not sure, and there might be other reasons as well.
Yeah,
but if it's specific to mobility, then what can you do? There are other things you can do, like work out, if it's somewhere, where can you park your car, how far you've got to walk. There are other practical things, but considering a walking aid in that situation that you can get out. And there are a whole variety of walking aids. I do personally recommend the ones that have moulded handles.
Oh yeah.
But that again, that's to consider those. But the look of it as well, I think, is important. You've got to feel, I've come across. I love finding out if someone has a fancy walking aid where they've got. There's a gentleman that I've known for years, and his walking aids are so cool, but he spends a lot of money getting someone make them and stuff.
Yeah.
But there are, really affordable kind of different pattern ones as well. And so I'm talking more about the aesthetics of walking aid, but hey, it's important what that looks like. And I think that's often people feel worried they're going to be viewed as elderly or old, and we all have this kind of negativity associated with aging. We need to kind of work with all of this, and it's seen as a negative thing, as opposed to maybe enhancing your ability to get on and live and do something and live your life. So maybe it's looking at not what it's representing in terms of negativity, but more in what it's enabling me to carry on doing. And ironically, what you might find is if you start to just consider the role a walking aid might have, then you may find that you're doing more by using a walking aid than if you weren't using one. You might be doing the less. And the same would apply to using a wheelchair. Again, I do encourage people early prescription of a wheelchair. Sometimes you can loan them for a Red Cross. There are lots of places and often people find that when they're going on holiday with the family, they can't keep up with the family, and that's the time when they might first consider using one, and often it's borrowing one from somewhere or hiring one from somewhere, or a mobility scooter, and then they realise, actually, I was able to do all the family stuff. Have a conversation or have a look, with your family, with a healthcare professional, about what's out there, what you can do, how you can access it. Doesn't have to be, and it might be that what you're going through at that moment with your MS symptom. You may have not got, completely on top of your fatigue management.
Yeah.
And then intermittent use of something might help you get to a stage, like a wheelchair, might help you navigate making sensible choices so that you're not getting fatigued and you've got enough energy to do the things you want to. So there's all sorts of different ways you might start wanting to use, but it's often something that people reject. And I really understand that, because they're worried that you're going to decondition because you're sat in it too long or whatever. So they're all real valid considerations that need to be fleshed out and need to be considered.
Yeah. But you already mentioned sort of that there is quite a lot of different choice out there. Yeah. I mean, it must be a bit of a minefield. What if you need to use something, but how do you start thinking about what's best for you? What should you do?
So I mentioned maybe starting with something that's really easeable, discreet, portable, just to give you that intermittent support. The other thing is, hold on to the arm of a friend, or telling a friend, family member, just letting them know that if I just hold your arm, I feel a little bit more confident. Yeah. But if you notice you're doing that a lot and you're not sure, I think that there's a combination of things. You don't want to become too dependent on your walking aid too early. Mm-hmm. So, and that, I think that's a real fear for a lot of people. And a walking aid, how you use it could have negative implications on your mobility. So it's how you use that, and I think that's a bigger kind of question and fear, and it's very individualized. So on one hand, I'm saying yes, early prescription, early consideration of a walking aid, either transiently, temporarily, or kind of more long term, to enable you to do more is what we're about here. But then checking, and am I over propping on something when I could be standing, which again, so that's where when you have your annual review or get an opportunity to consult with a physio, ask them specifically for what exercises can I do to optimize my balance. Or I've noticed I'm using my walking aid a lot more. What can I do to optimize my balance and my posture in moments when I don't need to rely on that so much? Because we can become a little bit dependent, and there's that term called crutch. Interestingly, I don't prescribe crutches very often, but some people do like to use crutches because they look more normal. They are more associated with a transient injury, like a broken leg that I've talked about earlier with myself. But they are quite effortful to use. But I'm not, it's not wouldn't be the first thing that I would recommend. But if someone came to me with crutches, we work with that. And some people do use them really successfully, really well, and for lots of reasons. They may have not got to the stage where they've told their work colleagues, for example, about their MS. And a crutch is, a more kind of normal, age-appropriate walking aid for a lot of people. So, and then that comes on to, you may have been using one stick, or two sticks, or one crutch, or two crutches, and then that comes on to, this isn't enough. And we all know there's that horrible old Zimmer frame, whatever, that image that people have. But there are a huge amount of what we call relators, 4-wheeled or 3-wheeled walking devices out there. And some of them, the 3-wheeled ones, they have casters and they turn quite quickly and they move quite quickly. But they're a bit more stable than maybe 2 sticks, because they're kind of joined together, but they still give you quite a lot of mobility and quite a lot of, particularly in tight circles. So I visited a man yesterday he uses his 3-wheeled walker in his house because it moves around really quickly, but outdoors he uses his 4-wheeled walker, and so the 3-wheeled walkers, just it's useful to note they exist. They are quite speedy, but they definitely have a role, particularly if you've been mentioned that you need something else, but it's not going to fit in your house. And the 4-wheeled walkers don't have as tight a turning circle because they're taking up a square base, but they do offer more stability because they increase your base of support from your feet and the big square area that they cover. And they often come with a seat and a basket in them. And some people love the basket for putting all your stuff in.
Yep.
But what's nice about the seat is that you don't have to worry necessarily about how far you're walking, because you know you can put the brakes on and perch on the seat and have a rest. The more supportive the walking aid device you have, the more you can lean on it and push down on it. And that's something that needs to be navigated really, really carefully, I think. And that's something I spend a lot of time working on people with. Because if you lean very, very heavily on anything, any form of support, and there have been some articles that were done back in the 90s, there was quite a host of articles. They did. They looked at the difference between, this is really for the stroke population, the difference between whether a tripod or a stick was better. With a tripod, you can lean down a little bit more heavily, but the key thing that they were doing is they had a force plate, and they were that was measuring the pressure that you were putting down through the walking aid device. And then they had electrodes on your leg muscles and your trunk muscles to see what happens. And the more you and the point here is, the more you press down, they press down on the walking aid device, the more the leg muscles switched off. And if you think about it, if you push down on something really, really hard, you can de-weight, completely. And if you're strong enough in your upper body, lift yourself off your feet. Well, that happens at a micro level. The more you push down and rely on your arms, the less your legs are required to do and to work on a very, very, very micro, quite insidious level. If you are always walking and you get your frame and you're safe and you're steady, and particularly if your feet are being really numb, you're feeling tired, and you just push down on that frame and you walk along, not only your arms going to feel really tired, our anatomy, our calorific burning and big muscles are in our legs, because they can store a lot of energy and power us along. If we're powering along on our upper bodies, one, we're going to get more fatigues. Two, our leg muscles aren't going to work as hard, and they're going to get weaker from not working as hard. And number three, your balance isn't going to be challenged. So while I'm saying I'm really pro early prescription and consideration of using a walking aid, it's how you use that through the course of kind of your day, your life, and different times of the day you'll use, and different situations you'll use different walking aids. You might decide that you need a relator upstairs and downstairs in your home. You might have some four-wheeled walkers or relators you use just indoors, as I've mentioned. A gentleman uses three-wheeled walker indoors, and then your forward walker with the seat outdoors. But then it's noticing, am I always holding on to something when I'm navigating the house? A lot of people, it's called, therapists will write furniture walking, but that kind of describes what happens. You're holding on to furniture as you get around the house. If you're doing that a lot, and is, I like to work with where that person's at. I'm not going to say you shouldn't do that. It's just, would you have more choice if you had a walking aid?
So should we just talk a little bit about like how you can actually get referred to a physio or OT, because not everybody might know that.
So there's several ways you could access currently at the moment physio. I think there's your local NHS provider. Most of them have self-referral process, but if they don't, if you can't refer yourself, and hopefully if you've been diagnosed with MS for a while, you know who your local NHS service is. And they normally will sit within a neurological team, or there might be a specialist MS team of physios. And some of them may have drop-in clinics, some of them might not. So, those are the types of questions to ask. If it's just a quick question you want to ask them, is there a way that I could ask this question or see someone? I only have a straightforward walking aid question to ask. Now, all services are set up differently, but a lot of them can self-refer. Some GP practices do have physiotherapists, within their clinics. More often they're to deal with musculoskeletal problems, back joint problems, not specialists in neurology, but there are some exceptions to that. where they may be able to give you some advice or help with walking aid prescriptions. So if you can't get to your neurological physio and you do just want to get hold of a walking aid and a bit of advice, it might not be the ideal neurological MS expert, but that's another route if you practically just want to get hold of one. Also, you have your MS therapy centres, and there are several throughout the country, and they are another really good resource to use. And again, probably easiest to maybe do a one-off drop-in and ask for their advice. Again, if you went there, you would probably have to look at self-purchase of your walking aid. They wouldn't be able to provide you with them. But they do, certainly in my area, if someone's been to one of the MS therapy centres and they've tried a particular four-wheeled walker, it usually is that they like, that they will recommend or prescribe. You can try your NHS provider and liaise, everyone will talk to each other to try and get that through the NHS. A little bit more convoluted, but... there are forums I know people use out there, and some of them are good and some of them not so good. Hopefully, if you can find a neurological physiotherapist, but I know that's not always easy.
No.
There are, we're all trained in basic walking aid provision as physiotherapists, so and there are physiotherapists that work more generically with the older population who will be able to prescribe you. So don't get to, if that's what you need in that moment, then, and you can't get to a neurological physio, then, there are other physios do know walking aids.
You mentioned funding. How do you sort of contact people about funding for these things? Because some of them can be quite expensive. So again, that will differ in different local NHS providers. Some will have an equipment budget and they'll know they can purchase the small bespoke stuff. Some will just say, this is what we provide, and it will be this type of frame. But and often it's the functionality of the frame is the same or similar, but the look is not. Right. And so if you want a different look, a different colour, it might be that you need to self-purchase. I personally think that I want people to have something they're comfortable with, but we do sometimes have to work within budgets. So it might be that you can take what your NHS provider can provide. If there's a specific need, say you've got, you need to have that specific handle, and that's to meet your function, then we can apply for exceptional needs funding. Most walking aids will come within, I think, most departments' budgets. I don't know, everywhere's going to be different. We're not quite the same. Some wheelchair services, you can get vouchers where you have what the NHS would provide, but you can top up with your own to get your own chair. We're not quite there with walking aids. Walking aid provision should be in every single physiotherapy department's budget, so you should be able to get one. So you mentioned about going to MS therapy center, and you were saying trying things out. I was just thinking when I remember many years back when I got my first ever buggy for, being pregnant, and I was going to one of the big department stores and I was wheeling around all these different things and trying it before we settled on one. I mean, it feels like that would be a very good way to go about trying a few different things out. So are there places like that you
Well,
go
interestingly, there are 3 MS centres that clients in my area access, and one of them they were talking about how we all work together and who does what well. And one of them, I said, what you have always offered is, without realising they were offering it, that kind of select and try kind of option with the walking aid. And where possible, in the NHS department that I work in, we offer that too, but we're a little bit more restrained with the budget that we have within the NHS. But so the MS therapy centres, that because they're not providing you with the frame, then you can go and, there's one in that people use locally that they have a little bit more of a selection of the more expensive ones. So it's knowing there's a whole host out there. But there are mobility shops that you can go into. where you can try out scooters, wheelchairs, walking aids. And sometimes they'll have someone with a degree of expertise. Sometimes it might be someone with a physio background, OT background in those actual shops. So there are places you can try before you buy. Most like NHS physiotherapy departments will have a couple of choices, but it will be, if I'm being honest, it will be limited because of storage space and cost. But people do try, but the market for like just choosing a pair of shoes, like running shoes, or any sports bit. Like I view this like sports equipment. I do view walking aids like sports equipment because it's enabling you to do more, to walk more, to do more. So it's a minefield out there of just like stuff you can get. So ask around as well if you don't like what your NHS provider can provide you with. On the whole, most people are more than happy with that, but there are other colours and slightly different designs, and I think that's important, particularly if that bothers you.
Oh, definitely,
to get that right.
We see some fantastic blinged up walking sticks and frames and things. Sometimes always makes me happy to see when people go really creative with it. I guess you must see a lot of that too.
Yeah, it just made me think because a client that I visited the other week, she's got it's like a forward walker, but it's got a really lovely tray on it. So it's like it's taken the best bits of a trolley, which you may have seen, which enables you to carry your cup of tea. Some people may even have been prescribed or given a trolley, usually by an OT, but you can hold on to. But it's not quite got the mobility of a walker. Yeah. Because it's there to carry your plate of food or your drinks. It's got a bit of a lip on it. And this had a tray with a cup holder in it. And it was in a really nice kind of aluminium and wood, and it kind of matched her decor of her home. And so she was pleased with that. And it had a cup holder, and it had like clips that could hold kind of something still within it. So but it had the mobility of a walker. Yeah. So it had like the best. So there are things out there, and she searched and read an article in the Telegraph, and someone had an online, I think it was called Rippable or something like that, some sort of online catalogue of all these different mobility aids. Yeah. It was aimed at the older population, and she was put off by it, but they had some really, really lovely stuff on there. And that sometimes maybe if it doesn't mess with your kind of perception of where you are with this too much, to go into the older people's market. You've got some really trendy grannies out there who want to, who for other reasons separate to MS due to aging need to take on mobility aids, and they don't want the standard NHS aluminium, grey thing. So there is lots of choice out there. Maybe look, don't go, no, that's not for me. And then ask. Don't know if that's the right advice or not, but she showed me this online thing, but it was catered to the kind of older age group. So don't discount looking at those things. Is what I was really trying to say.
I think it's funny with the age thing, because I had a very youthful grandmother. She didn't have MS, but she was very active and she used to do things. But she started to need to use a walker, and she just refused to do it because it would make her look old. And, this was a 92-year-old lady. And so I think a lot of people have that sort of issue with the age.
And we touched on that really early on. And I think we also need to acknowledge that that's really, really hard if you're in your 20s. Really hard. Exactly. And I think that everyone needs space to, I think you need more space and time to navigate that. And I think it does need to be done sensitively. And I'm really comfortable with people rejecting that. But it is a bit of an elephant in the room when it first comes up. And I've had lots of people, and I've learned a lot. That's why I've been really privileged to have literally walked and not walked with people through the 20 years of their MS, and being with them through you reach those points. And I know they've said to me, I was so horrible about that, but it was the right choice, and I'm so grateful. So, but I also think that the anger, the rejection, the kind of this isn't fair, they're all really valid feelings, and they're all part of that process of taking on a walking aid. And if your 95-year-old grandmother has that, then it's going to, be massive. But it's, I suppose, like anything I will approach in life, we all can have that negativity bias, but it's looking at not what it takes away, but what does it give you back. And I think with the walking aid provision, if you can try and flip that in your head space, then you're it's not easy. No. I'm not trying to kind of water down how challenging that can be. I work really closely with clinical psychologists, and sometimes having a couple of sessions talking about your feelings either with a family member or with a professional person can be really helpful. And if that can be done while you're having your physiotherapy sessions, or you can do that and then come back, that might be what you need to do, and talk about, everybody's different. There's no kind of right or wrong really with that.
Hi, it's Will, volunteer producer and disembodied voice of this episode. We're going to take a short break right now. You'll recall Elena at the top of the show warning you her conversation with Jody was quite long, and that's even after my smooth and perfectly seamless edits. So we've decided to splice something a little different in the middle to try breaking it down.
Breaking it down.
As you know, the MS Trust website is a trove of helpful resources for anyone affected by multiple sclerosis. Usually in the middle bit of the show, we plug their A to Z of MS, which runs the gamut from ABN, the Association of British Neurologists, to Zynbrita, which you'll have guessed from the science fiction name, is a disease-modifying drug. But when it comes to the theme of this episode, mobility, there are entries for mobility services, wheelchair vouchers, the benefits of exercise, walking difficulties, falls, etc. But in fact, as helpful as the A to Z is when you know exactly what you're looking for, I find it sometimes useful to just scan through it letter by letter to see what's there and find things I wouldn't have thought to search for. And speaking of things we do not think to search for, I'd like to put in a good word for the latest section of the website, just at the very top, latest. By the time you listen to this, it will have changed, of course, but let me take you through a selection of what's up there at the moment. So you can look at the latest research or the latest news, which also include the research, and then filter by type of article, by theme, etc. Just this last month, we've had an article by Emily, the Wibbly Dinosaur, whom you'll have heard in the previous episode all about mobility, and if you haven't, you really should go and listen to Emily's interview. It's very, very good. The piece is called Just Keep Wheeling, dated 14th of July 2021, and it's about Emily's journey of wheelchair adoption and wheelchair acceptance. But that's not all. Just this month, there is an interview with Diva Hollywood, cabaret performer and friend of the podcast. Look out for her interview a couple of episodes back. There's a fundraising story from Sarah and her student union, a candid piece by Michelle, who got back into belly dancing, having given up on it after a diagnosis. Science-wise, there's a very interesting piece on a recent study on dating with MS, although I must confess I've had dinner parties with a larger sample size than this study. Still, it's good to know the research is being done. There's also news on the approval of Kesimpta, which is ofatumumab for relapse-remitting MS in Scotland. It's interesting, they've kind of exhausted the Transformers area for naming, so now they're going Lion King, Kesimpta. Still in the latest research section, you will find considerations on access to stem cell therapies on the NHS and much, much more as you go backwards in time. I was just hoping to whet your appetite for some of that stuff, whether it's research and sciencey stuff or more human, personal, patient stories, fundraising stories. The latest section of the MS Trust website is here for you, and that's all to be found at mstrust.org.uk. I will now return you to your scheduled program, which is physiotherapist Jody, talking the talk with Elena, talking the talk about walking the walk.
I wanted to cover a couple of things about how to use a walking aid, how to use a wheelchair.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, because we started to talk about if you press down too hard, it can switch off the activity in the legs. And one exercise that I give to people is make sure you've got something behind you, so that if your legs give way or whatever, you've got a armchair or bed or something that's secure that no one can catch you. But when you first stand up, if you're going to walk and say you've got your forward relator, can you hold that lightly, and can you just gently roll it away and back with the lightest finger touch as possible and keep your balance. If you become aware that you're pressing down and holding and then moving along, and that might be the only way you can move, by putting a lot of weight through your arms. But you could test yourself in a safe place, in a safe way, and if need be, have someone, you know, a carer, relative, someone who you know could help support you with a controlled sit down, or a not uncontrolled sit down, but safely be next to you. And can you just have that moment of standing and either not holding on to the frame and balance, or gently pushing it forwards and backwards, so that with a light touch, and either of those, standing without holding on. Because what I often have reported to me, and when we might do a physiotherapy assessment, is I'll make somebody, or make someone, sounds awful what I do, but I'll we'll explore standing without holding on, and they'll often say, oh, I never do that, I haven't, oh my word. And it's a bit of a shock to that person sometimes. They go, I hadn't realised that there are very little opportunities in my daily life where I don't hold on. I hadn't realised it got that bad. And that's just because, you know, and that can sometimes, we can manipulate that. You can manage that. So I always say, well, that's great. We've discovered this now. We can do something about it. So you could self-test yourself. Am I over-relying a bit on my arms more than I need to? And there are going to be, and this always comes with a kind of, there are clauses to this. There are going to be times when you need to. Safety needs to come first. When your environment is the richer your environment is, the more vivid what's going on around you is, the harder it is going to be for you to balance and maneuver about. So never ever try to change or do anything in a novel situation when your environment's really crowded, and that can be your internal environment as well as your external environment. So if your head's really busy, you're really raw, I can't think that, you know, we all know what we mean. Or, you know, the household's really busy, you've got teenage children or little children or whatever your household's made up at, maybe your dog woofing at you. There's a lot going on. Don't do it then. You want to do that when it's quiet, you're in control of your environment. If you need someone there to explore standing without holding on. And then you can build that into, once you become established and competent at that, you can build on that. And then there can be exercises you can do, like lifting your arm up in the air and standing. And you might still need to use your walking aid to navigate and walk, but you're not using your walk, you're not doing that at the detriment of allowing yourself to balance. There are moments in your day where you will be able to balance and not hold on. And that's what sometimes I think people don't realise they've lost, and but they can still retain, if that kind of makes sense. So there are, and if you're not sure, that's something to maybe say to your healthcare professional. I've noticed that I'm using my walking aid a lot, and I feel like I'm not sure what balance exercises I can do. And there are some really useful online resources out there. Am I able to mention something that isn't the MS Trust that's a good online?
Of course you can. Of course you can.
The MS Society has a really lovely managing your symptoms series of exercises, and there's one section where there's an Irish lady talking about balancing, and that's a really useful thing that I often direct people to have a look at, and go through some balancing exercises to do while the kettle boils. And those kind of things are the types of things that you can do to maintain your balance. Make sure that you're not over-relying on your arms too much while still using a walking aid. So it's about how you continue to use a walking aid to help enhance your mobility and not try and speed up the rate of decline, which is what people are worried about. Often that will that will happen. And if you do notice you've tipped the balance into over-relying on your walking frame, there's usually a really reasonable margin in which you can kind of recapture some of that. Because particularly where it's down to disuse of muscles, that's just muscles that haven't been exercised, but they're still there. We can exercise those. You can strengthen those back up, be it your balance and your muscle strength. There's an awful lot that can be recaptured. It's not all lost. It's just knowing how to do that and where to start.
So where would you direct for somebody who haven't been doing any exercise or anything like that? How would you tell someone like that to go about starting?
There's lots of places you can start. First of all, if the desire is there, that's going to be easier. So, we've mentioned you've got your MS centres. An easy, quick way would be to find out one of the advantages of the pandemic is an awful lot of exercise classes have been converted to online resources, which means they're really, really easy accessible. So have a look, your local MS Society, MS centres, what online resources there are, and start with something. And if you're not used to doing something in at all, start with a seated class first of all, because even in a seated class, you'll do a lot of arm exercises sitting from the chair, which will strengthen your trunk, which will improve your ability to stand without holding on. So it doesn't always have to be in standing. And then just get started with something, and it's got to be something that you enjoy. This is key. If you don't enjoy it, you're not going to. So there's two things on this enjoyment factor. Sometimes you have to go through a little bit of pain, a little bit of discomfort to change your habit. So you might, and then you might find there's joy in it. But if once you've given it a good go, class or whatever exercise, and you're still not getting with it, it might be the type of exercises you're doing, the tone of that you might not like the person delivering the exercises. That's also allowed. You don't have to, that's why we've got lots of different choice out there. So give it a good go, and then if that's not, then find somebody or something different. We're all different. Some of us like really prescribed exercises that we follow. Some of us like more of an activity. As a physiotherapist, prescribing exercises, me personally, I'm more of an activity girl in terms of I'd rather do an activity. Now that can sound so like throwing and catch. I'd rather throw and catch a ball than do an arm exercise. That's what I mean by an activity. Okay. And that, or it could be seated archery. It could be. Now that's not always that accessible, but it's just about. Is the exercise too like now lift your arm, now do this, now do that, or is it more like just play a game or whatever? So it might be like, I know that Wii's a bit out of fashion, but that kind of interactive computer game thing, I consider more of an activity. So just work that out in yourself. Do you like more like following a prescribed exercise, lift your arm, reach it? Some people love that. Or is it more activity, fun, game based type of and sometimes it's a combination of both. So working that out can be helpful. And as the world is opening up a little bit more currently, there are gyms that you can go to. Where they'll have specialist exercise classes. So find out what your local gym is offering and opening up as well. So I think that's what exercise. I didn't say what exercise you can do, is how to exercise, how to engage with exercise, because
it's fun what you're saying about activities, though, because I think a lot of people, if they go out and do a bit of gardening, or I know people will sort of have seated, you sit down and do things, and it's such a good exercise, but you don't feel like you're exercising. So it's fun and they're enjoying it instead of doing the whole 1, 2, 3, I need to do this. And
absolutely. Gardening's a really, really, really key one and stuff. And I was asking, I've recently taken up rock climbing and horse riding. And I just think, just look and see what's out there, and it's asking, can you adapt and you can adapt rock climbing very, very, very easily and they're, in fact, you're tied on and stuff like that, and you can do, so there's lots of things you can do, and you can do that from a wheelchair. They have wheelchair users that go rock climbing at American Rock Climbing Centre, and there are ways around something. And I did I helped a lady a couple of years ago, adapt from standing skiing to sit skiing. Now these things are expensive, but there are charities there that will fund some things. So sometimes you have to be a bit more creative if it's something you really want to do, and that's not harder to do every day. But I sometimes think if you're getting fit for a goal, to be able to do something, then you're more motivated to do your everyday kind of dull stuff as well. So mix it up, shake it up. I'm a firm believer that you should try new things out, learn new things. You get a huge like endorphin release and oxytocin release when you get a huge endorphin release with exercise anyway, which is like you're happy, the hormones that make you feel happy. But also when you exercise with a buddy, it's another thing that's really good to do with somebody else in a group. And also if you try a new activity, something new, something novel, you get that novelty releases a lot of oxytocin, which is another really feel-good hormone.
Yeah.
So all of those things will help make exercise a little bit more, fun and enjoyable.
Yeah.
Because sometimes if it's just a do this, do that kind of class, all you feel is how hard it is.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're not looking forward to going, then it's going to be a bad start. But we can hope now with the Paralympics coming up that people could watch that and maybe get inspired to try some things. Not saying that, your goal should be to be a Paralympic athlete, but it's a good idea to get some ideas on sports that you never thought that you could.
I think that can be hugely inspirational. And I think if you listen to some of the stories of some of these people, then what started off their journey was something that they perhaps encouraged to take up, that they enjoyed, and then they discovered they had a talent for that, or just worked really hard.
Yeah.
I just enjoyed it. I think a lot of hard work, grit and determination. So, but there are, I think, we talked about activities. I'm always really conscious that I think it does need to be acknowledged that if you're working with any form of disability, and I think sometimes if the disability is more hidden than obvious, it's harder or as hard to take up a new activity.
Yeah.
And that's where your physiotherapist or friends, you can recruit them to help you. Even if it's just an exercise class for someone, with MS or all abilities or whatever, and you're worried about going, take a friend. Find a friend who's willing to, and have fun. I think having fun is very important.
Yeah. No, it really is, isn't it?
Yeah, you won't feel like exercise then.
No. Well, I think that's the best type of exercise, when it felt like you didn't actually do any exercise. It was all just fun.
Yeah.
You feel happy coming out of there.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of questions about specific type of exercises that are really good for mobility? So like how to strengthen your ankles or things like that?
So the types of exercises that I would give for, say, ankle. So with ankles, weak ankles, it can be sensory. And often we'll start with some sensory stuff and some general, and it could be stiffness as well, which means you're stiff in your foot, so your ankles aren't quite so strong. So I would prescribe general mobility exercises for the ankles, and that involve rolling the foot over a ball, or stretching. If you haven't got a ball, stretching on the inside edge, the outside edge of your foot, stretching the front of the foot and the ankle. People think about just stretching the back, but all of that, because if it's a little bit tight, then your ankle won't respond as well. And then working then towards, once we've done a bit of mobilizing and some sensory stuff, making you aware, the more you move something, the more you're aware. If you use the spiky ball, you can tap into your deeper pressure receptors to try and access any sensation. We've got lots of different sensory modes in our body, from knowing where our foot is. I've talked about proprioception, from deep touch to light touch to deep pressure to pinprick to all of those things. So you can access all of those through your stretches, through your mobilizing with your foot on a ball, stretching your foot, and then work towards some standing exercise, and then maybe standing on one leg exercise, or standing with one foot in front of the other. And the MS Society exercises that they have in standing balance, I often will prescribe a bit of foot mobilizing, and then try a standing balance exercise. So There are ankle circles. I don't often give, but you can do them. I often see a lot of foot flapping instead, but just give it a really good stretch and a move and quiet, a bit like you're dusting out the corners of your ankle, more kind of getting into it, like giving it a
starting to wiggle my feet now when you were saying
yeah. There's like loads. There's loads that you can do. I feel like that is a separate podcast almost, to talk about what to do with your ankles.
When I brush my teeth both morning and evening, I do ankle raises, and it's almost like to the point now, if I don't do them, I feel as guilty as if I wouldn't have brushed my teeth. So it's just kind of, you condition yourself to, that's what I need to do. And sometimes that sort of helps, because then you do it almost.
Absolutely. And ankle raises is great, coming up on your toes if you can. Rocking back on your heels, just I do think variety as well. So if you'll get a bit stuck in, this is what I always do, variety is good. Our nervous system craves variety, it likes variety.
There was a question that when I asked, I was telling the information team about that I was going to chat to you, and then they said, this is a question we get quite a lot of the time. Like, if you got issues with a mobility aid or a walking stick, to actually have them adjusted, how do you?
Oh, yeah, it's a really good question. The height. There's a standard height that you're taught as a physiotherapist, and I often, you could have a relative or someone, that's not the right height, and someone else comes in. So it's not a straightforward answer, but there are some principles for you to consider. So it depends. If you're using your walking aid as an occasional prop, light touch contact support, you want it fairly high. So sometimes people will prescribe, and I didn't mention these actually, hiking poles.
Oh, yes.
They're really good. And that's what I meant, actually. Either a walking stick or get a collapsible hiking pole in your bag, because they look, like a piece of exercise equipment, like the Nordic walkers use. So often people start with those, and they're really, really tall. And what's really good about something that's really tall is you can't push down on it, but it's offering you a little bit of support, a bit of light touch contact. So a hiking pole is a really, really good thing to use. And so obviously I will always prescribe, if I'm in the position of early prescription of a walking aid, is high, and that's even your forward relator. I set it quite high so that it limits the amount that you can bear down and lean down on it. Now, that comes with a kind of footnote, is that you need to, that walking aid needs to be able to support you in moments when you are off balance. So you're giving it ridiculously high, obviously up above your head, but kind of, I'm trying to think, so your elbows, I'm trying to think, so your elbows generally, I'm going to have to stand up to just test this on myself, but just so that your elbows are at 90 degrees, no higher than that, but that's quite high. Other walking aids will be prescribed. This is to do with supporting people after hip replacements. They're prescribed at a 45-degree angle of the arm. That's so that you can take weight down through that stick to take the weight off of the hip that's healing. That's how that's where that comes from. So if you're using your walking aid, as most people will be in MS, to support an aid balance, you want it so your arms are roughly at 90 degrees. I say roughly at a comfortable angle, so it's offering a bit of support, that light touch contact that will enable your body muscles to enhance, your torso muscles to enhance standing and walking, but not so low that it's pushing down hard and switching off your legs. So generally, early prescription high, and then you might need to adjust the height of it according to your need. So it's a little bit lower. That's just from my, sorry, can I just say, that's just from my clinical experience based on evidence that I've cited around walking aids. So the article around light touch support was a guy called Jecker in 1997, and he really looked at the impact that light touch support can have on enhancing. And this came from observing that when we run down the stairs, we may lightly run your fingertips on a stair rail, in everyday life, and anyone may do that. And he started to explore what happened and notice that, that actually enhances your trunk muscles to work harder for you in that situation. So that's where all of that knowledge about having a higher frame to offer that light touch support comes from. So it's not just like Jody says.
I think it was interesting what you were saying about the walking pose, because, I mentioned my grandmother and who really refused the walking frame. So, because I'm Swedish, and so was my grandmother. So in the end, she got herself some walking poles, the Nordic ones, because she lived close to a park. And there were lots of young people walking around there with walking poles, because it's just a thing they do in Sweden. And
there are loads of Nordic walking groups out there as well. So, if that can be a really good group exercise you could join. And the one down the road for me, they stand in a circle and they meditate and stuff. It looks very nice.
Oh,
and then they go for a walk. It's like mindful Nordics, just a very, they just walk in the woods. It's lovely. Yeah.
Again, the kind of exercise that you wouldn't necessarily even think that it's exercise, because it's enjoyable. Right. Before we go, what would your sort of top tips for mobility be, like a takeaway?
Top tips are, if you can, consider the role a walking aid may have in enhancing your ability to do more earlier. So we've just ties in quite nicely with, the hiking poles and stuff like that. Have one in the house or whatever, sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
That a walking aid isn't necessarily the beginning of the end. It's a way of enhancing you to do more. So with a walking aid, because you are relying a little bit on something, think about what exercises, find out what exercises you can do to enhance. You do have to work a little bit more at your balance earlier on in life if you take a walking aid on. So what exercises can you do? Talk about it with friends and family. Talk about the elephant in the room, because it is, we have talked quite a bit in this podcast about how the kind of negative aspects that society holds around walking aids and aging and stuff like that. Share that, talk about it with people, friends, family and professionals if you really are struggling. It isn't the beginning of the end. I could give so many examples of a guy that stopped going to the football because he wouldn't, and then we got him a forward relator and he'd go back to the football again because he could get to the stadium.
Yeah.
He didn't really need it a lot of the time, but it was just that navigating the car to the stadium.
Yeah.
He couldn't go. So, think about what, not what it takes away, but not what it gives back. That kind of flipping it in your head. What you have as opposed to what you don't have, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Particularly with walking aid provision. I think they're my top tips.
It is really. I was just going to say, it really is about thinking about it, how it enables you rather than it doesn't disable you, it enables you to.
Absolutely, yes, it doesn't. That's got quite a nice ring to it. But I just also would say acknowledge that it's a really, 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 despite us, all the top tips, it is hard when you get to that stage when you think you need a walking aid device or a wheelchair. It is hard, and I think acknowledging that is hard and having space for that is also really, really important as well, because you might be able to, if you give yourself time and acknowledge and throw it across the room or whatever, just don't break anything on the way. I think that's completely normal human reaction. You can, even throw it at your physio. No, I haven't said that, but but I just think that on a sensible note, it's just acknowledging. I don't want to be flippant. That just early walking aid prescription. It's not an easy thing. Not an easy thing at all. If you're living with MS at all.
Do you think it's like talking to other people who are using them?
I think
that's a good
that from my experience of talking to people, some people will find that they're able to do that. It's really helpful. Some people, it's too much of facing their fear to see somebody in a chair with a walking aid. they don't want to see that reflection, if you know what I mean. But that's a very individual thing, and it depends where you're at. So I think, yes, it can be absolutely helpful. Maybe someone that's been walking the walk of MS or not actually a little bit for a few more years than you, someone with a little bit more life experience of living with MS might be easier to take than someone that I don't know, because that can, it is a hard one, I'm afraid. Sorry, because
but that makes sense, because
it can be really helpful, absolutely, but it can also be really hard for people as well, to talk to other people.
That makes sense, because I mean, it's not one size fits all. In the same way as there's so many different of these aids out there, then the way you get there is all different, isn't it? And you get quite a lot of people who are open about this, that will sort of, I don't know, they might write a blog or they might have an Instagram site, but they will talk about it, and so you could sort of, you could lurk, you could watch without engaging as well.
Guy, I think he's done some stuff on the MS Trust, who's down the road from me, blogs quite a lot and stuff. There's loads of bloggers. They're really, really good, because they're quite candid, they're quite frank, they're quite talk about the rough and the smooth of life as well with MS. So the blogging is really good, because it's less preachy and a little bit more can resonate with you. And I think that's hard. I think you can reject something that's really helpful because it feels like it's not your choice. And no one chooses to have MS and then choosing to have a walking aid. That's just like it's, as we've mentioned, like I think with flavour we've got across this podcast, this is not easy. Not easy at all. So but can open up a lot of opportunities for you. A lot of opportunities once you get over all of that stuff that gets in the way, which is really real stuff as well.
Definitely. This has been super interesting, Jody.
I hope it's been useful for everyone.
It's been very useful. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, and let's hope that lots of people will try and go out there and talk to their physios now then. No, thank you. Well, hope everyone's found it useful, that finds it useful, and thank you for listening, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you. And we are back.
So that was a really interesting discussion from you and Jody. I thought it was quite interesting, the point where she talked about taking a mobility aid with you to start with, to sort of get used to sometimes when you need it, but you don't have to rely on it all the time, and about sort of putting it in your bag. Because in that way, I kind of thought it was not very different to, if it's a bit cloudy outside and you take an umbrella, and, if you take an umbrella, you're not giving it in and saying it will necessarily rain. You just are being organised.
But it's about preparation, isn't it? It's if you got children with you, you might pop snacks and stuff in the bag, and actually, so it's when you start looking at things like using that kind of analogy, it gets much easier to just think that, well, this is just being prepared and being smart. I thought Jody was so open and talking about like how difficult of a subject it can be, and how it's easy for people who have no mobility problems to sort of say, well, just start using one. It's not an issue, but it's not just about needing to use one, but actually coming to terms to doing so as well. I think it's clearly a tricky subject, and I think even though we can probably not solve the issue with why it's such a stigma and why people still talk about it in negative ways, I think just talking more about it really does help. And I think with that, doing this podcast and the previous one, and with Wibbly in the previous podcast being so open about it, I think that's all good stuff. And I think I learned a lot about doing this podcast as well. And I thought, going back to the previous one when Wibbly was talking about holding on to furniture and fences and things. And I think the balance between stop holding on to furniture and having that conversation with yourself about using a mobility aid is a tricky one. But then also what Jody was saying about not relying on whatever aid you start using. I've mentioned my grandfather before, who had MS, and when he started having mobility issues, he was pretty much given a wheelchair and sort of been told to, don't exert yourself, take it easy, sit in here. So he became reliant on the wheelchair quite quickly, just because there was no sort of physio or anything like that. But now, obviously, there's research and things telling us that is not the way you should do it, and you should be trying to go into the gym and doing exercises to build up, so you can help the muscles that you do have that are struggling. So yeah, I think that's a really positive message to send out. And the other thing that I really took home from this conversation is what a hard subject it is. And it is easy for me to sit here and talk about, because I don't have mobility issues, but it's that's when you just have to be a bit quiet and listen and learn, because you don't know what it's like for anyone until you actually have to deal with the issue.
Yeah, I think we've had a few times, haven't we, at the Trust? I can't remember whether I mentioned this in the last episode about people saying that one of their predominant images that came to mind when they were first diagnosed was of someone they knew that was in a wheelchair. And that obviously invoked a lot of questions about whether that would happen to them, or when that stage would be that they would need to start thinking about mobility issues. For you personally, obviously you mentioned your grandfather using a wheelchair. Was that something that you were worried about when you were diagnosed?
I'd say sort of yes and no. Growing up with my granddad, the wheelchair wasn't anything weird or scary, because it had always been there for as long as I knew, and I fully just saw it as a kind of great tool. I used to think he was pretty cool having wheels with him and being able to do this. And I was quite a lazy child, so the fact that he could always wheel around and always sit down, I thought that's great. I always used to sort of clamber up into his lap and try and sit there. So I wasn't so scared about wheelchairs because I had seen them being a positive thing. But when I was diagnosed and I told my mum, she completely freaked out, because she thought that was definitely going to be the path for me as well. And I was in the middle of buying a house at the time, and she was, "Oh, you can't have a house with stairs. You need a bungalow straight away." That was 13 years ago since I was diagnosed, and I'm doing fairly okay at the moment. So you never know. But that said, I have to admit, I do have a bit of a weakness in my right leg, and I don't feel it all the time, but I can sometimes feel it when I run, because I do quite a lot of running. And I can feel it when it's really, really hot. It feels a little bit like my leg is falling asleep. That is sort of, I can't completely stand on it. And then sometimes when it's really cold, I feel a stiffness instead. So it feels like it's almost made of metal or something. It goes much harder. And I think I've probably been ignoring it a lot of the time, because I mostly just feel it when I'm being physically active. But I feel like after I was talking to Jody, it sort of made me feel like, actually, I do probably need to mention this to my MS nurse. I do need to think about it and bear it in mind, because it is clearly something that's not completely right. And also, like, the more open we are, the better. And what I said before, we just need to get better at listening and understanding how it feels for people who are using mobility aids.
One way to break the stigma about mobility aids is to share your story with others. If you've got a story that you'd like to share, please get in touch with us at mystory@mstrust.org.uk, and we'd love to hear from you.
And I think we said it before as well, but if you have pictures of kind of jazzed up scooters or wheelchairs or walking sticks or Nordic poles, I'm kind of thinking of getting Nordic poles now after being Swedish and hearing what Jody said about it. I kind of thought, well, actually, that sounds like a good thing. But any pictures like that, we do love to see them, because I think came through from both Wibbly and Jody, like personalizing things and making it sort of your own, and making it a bit of a conversation piece, I suppose, as well, could really be a positive thing. So we'd love to see it if you have any. Now, remember that if you have any questions about MS, we're here for you. Our MS Trust inquiry service is available from Monday to Friday, except UK bank holidays, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can call us on 0800 032 38 39 or email ask@mstrust.org.uk. Outside of these hours, you can leave us a message and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
You can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this podcast on Google, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. And get in touch with us if you've got any suggestions for podcasts you'd like to hear in the future or any feedback. And feel free to leave some reviews as well. And of course, as they say, like and subscribe. And we'd like to say a big thank you to Ant Chapman Audio for the music he provided for this podcast.